UAE's normalization of ties with Israel is rooted in ambition. It's rooted in a desire to get Israel on board with wider UAE ambitions in the region, to target UAE rivals, the likes of Qatar, the likes of Turkey, to keep the White House on board and prevent any potential repercussions from US lawmakers or the White House should Biden come to power over UAE activities, whether that's in Libya or whether that's in Yemen. But herein lies the problem for Mohammed bin Zayed, in that behind the fanfare of normalization, behind the condemnation, behind the concept of normalization of ties with Israel, there isn't actually much substance yet. There isn't actually much clarity over what this actually means for the UAE and for Israel. And in fact, Abu Dhabi is likely to have far more concerns over the normalization of ties with Israel, not necessarily from a moral perspective, but more from a practical perspective, because it is becoming increasingly clear that Tel Aviv has very different expectations over what normalization means. Where UAE believed that normalization would facilitate the sale of F-35s, they were surprised to see Israel stand against it despite offering normalization of ties. Moreover, Israel is very keen to establish an anti-Iran alliance, Iran with which the UAE enjoys warm ties. It helped Tehran to circumvent sanctions. It is one of the largest trading partners with Iran. And in Yemen, it tends to avoid the areas where Iran is supporting the Houthis and is focused on the separatists, with whom the Houthis are also trying to come to some sort of north-south divide. In other words, the UAE is not particularly keen on an anti-Iran alliance. UAE wants to target Turkey, it wants to target Qatar. And herein lies the problem, in that Israel is seeking to woo Turkey. Israel is seeking to keep Qatar on board as it tries to maintain a channel with Hamas and maintain a channel with the Palestinians. So in other words, Israel wants to use normalization to achieve a goal that the UAE does not want to achieve, and UAE wants to use normalization to achieve a goal that Israel does not want to achieve. And herein lies the real problem, in that normalization may not actually materialize into anything more than a PR stunt to help boost Donald Trump in the hope that he might win the elections and might maintain that status quo, given that if Biden comes to power, it is expected that Israel and the UAE may have a harder relationship with the White House than they currently have.